Welcome to Herbally Yours, an adventure into the world of natural medicine. Here is your host, Dr. Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse who will help you take the leap to ultimate wellness.
And greetings. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, for another edition of Herbally Yours, right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Herbally Yours always brings you the latest information about the many facets in the world of natural living. And today, we are very happy to have as our guest Karen Howard. She is the CEO and Executive Director of Organic and Natural Health Association. And Karen is a visionary and results-focused leader who has spent more than 30 years working with Congress, state legislatures, and healthcare organizations to develop innovative healthcare policy and programs. She has held a variety of executive positions, including serving as professional staff for a congressional committee, and has policy expertise in the diverse areas of integrative and complementary medicine, managed care, healthcare technology, and mental health. She's an advocate at heart and has worked to strategically advance the mission and vision of organizations through effective advocacy and strong collaboration. Prior to Organic and Natural Health, Howard served as executive director for both the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians and the Association of Accredited Naturopathic Medical Schools. During her nearly 10-year tenure at AANP, she built a sustainable infrastructure, significantly improved financial performance, established a strong federal presence, and supported multiple state association advocacy efforts for licensure. Also during this time, the naturopathic medical profession established itself as a key component of comprehensive health care for the future. And you can find out more about Karen Howard and her work at organicandnatural.org. You spell that out, organicandnatural.org. Of course, we'll have a live link on our archives. So thank you so much for being with us today, Karen.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, there's always so much going on, and I know you have your finger on the pulse of the political activity that is really intimately linked to the development and sale and regulatory status in the nutraceutical industry.
I do work to keep that status. It is an ever-changing and dynamic process, I tell you. Just in the last couple of weeks, there have been many, many hours of conversations and hearings around those issues.
There has, and you know, some of the misinformation that I find that the public has is they say that dietary supplements are not regulated, whereas pharmaceutical drugs are regulated. How would you answer that?
Yeah, so dietary supplements are regulated. They're the second most regulated food that we have, the first being baby food, which makes sense. And what our naysayers and doubters are referring to is that there's no regulatory process for pre-approval before you go on the market. And we do that with pharmaceuticals because essentially pharmaceuticals are foreign agents in your body. So it's important to know that, yes, they'll be effective, but more importantly, that they won't harm you. Whereas food and nutrition and nutrients derived from those foods are already in your body. Makes research very complex, but it does explain the different tier of regulatory approval level, the way it is. So all the manufacturing processes are completely regulated through the FDA standards of good manufacturing practices and guidelines. And in addition, there are labeling requirements. There are a lot of standards and regulations that people have to go through to put their products on the shelf. Where we suffer as an industry is that there are a lot of bad actors, just like there are in any industry, and FDA lacks the resources to be able to truly manage those bad actors and get them and use enforcement to get them off the market, working with FTC. So you see that in gas stations and convenience stores, products that make horrible claims and often are contaminated or can include pharmaceutical elements that make them illegal. And that's kind of where the bad rep can derive from, and that's where people use they need to be pre-approved before they go on the market.
Which there seems to be some conversation. Now, first of all, my saying is always education above regulation, because while regulation can certainly lead to safer products, if we look at the pharmaceutical industry, almost every single pharmaceutical drug is actually not safe. And if anyone watches television, after almost every single pharmaceutical commercial nowadays, the next commercial is for a law office soliciting suits from the adverse effects that happened by taking that pharmaceutical. And they're highly regulated.
Yeah, highly regulated. And the safety record for dietary supplements is very clear. I mean, it's like 2,000 adverse events in a year. And so when conversations come up, as they have recently, about certain kinds of ways to add regulation to the industry, it isn't really going to change anything until you can enforce the rules that you already have on the books. But at a recent hearing a couple of weeks ago, Health Canada testified, which was extremely interesting because the way they manage their supplements, it's very different. But one of the things they do is if you do not have a registration number on your product, it will be yanked off the shelves. So you have to get this. If you're going to do it that way, you have to get some way of being able to manage a registration process that has teeth. And as it is, we know that the preponderance of all the adverse events and the problems are instituted in 3 separate parts of the industry, and we know where those products are. And of course, we also have the internet. So being able to enforce those provisions, we stood up and said in public, Organic and Natural Health would support legislation to give you the resources and the financial support to be able to manage the laws that we have before you decide to go off and implement new laws. So I think FDA gets a little caught up in the glory of policy and fails to recognize that as their number one job, which is safety for consumers, that they actually should be more focused on enforcement than they are.
That's true. But, it is interesting in terms of safety for consumers that the pharmaceutical industry has a really terrible record, I would say. The amount, you may even have the number handy, of both adverse effects and even deaths due to pharmaceutical drugs is huge.
Yes, it's in the hundreds of thousands. I don't have them at my fingertips, but I have recently researched them for the purpose of having this conversation in front of FDA. The reality is that there's a lot of money in pharmaceuticals. And Peter Cohen actually got up, who's not one of our more favorite advocates. He spends a lot of time speaking to the dangers of dietary supplementation and actually equated pharmaceuticals and supplements as one and the same because they have an active mechanism in the body. Well, I think pretty much everything in your body has an active mechanism. So I think he really short-shifted the conversation. But it's easy for people who are predisposed to dislike supplements and not trust them to point to our mishaps. And yet society seems to, and certainly the agency seems to, accept a certain level of risk associated with taking pharmaceuticals that includes death. I'm not sure we'll ever change that paradigm in my lifetime. So in the interim, what the industry has done itself is really move towards not necessarily meeting all the expectations of everyone who wants us to be their adversary, but really focusing on what the consumer wants and being transparent, demonstrating traceability of our products. And it really has reinstilled and built the consumer faith in the industry to know that what the products they're getting, it's what it says is in the bottle is in the bottle.
And that is important.
I always say
I want to remind you that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Karen Howard, and you can find out more about her and her work at organicandnatural.org. Karen, why did you set up organicandnatural.org, and how can consumers use that very friendly website?
Oh, yeah. The best website in the world in terms of learning about nutrition is nutrientpower.org, which is our consumer-facing site. And what we realized when we opened the doors 5 years ago is that there was a lack of consideration of the consumer interest in terms of what was being purported through the public policy domain. And we really are there to change the relationship between consumers and corporations. So as a result, we represent the entire supply chain, including retailers and consumer associations like Organic Consumers Association. And the board's decisions are made completely on the basis of what will serve consumers. So it's a very different approach than a more pejorative, how can we shore up industry for the financial benefit of our members. Our members understand that when the consumers are happy, they are able to profit from that. And they are committed to that and to improving the health of the planet as well as people.
So you're saying that good website for individual consumers to visit is, what is it called?
nutrientpower.org.
Okay.
And what we've done is identify 15 nutrients where people are most deficient and give people options for what to eat, what supplements to take, and educate them on some of our big projects around vitamin D and omega-3. And now we're getting ready to move into magnesium and help people understand what it means to be deficient and how it impacts their health status, and do the research to support the physical benefit of taking those supplements. So you're not just taking them on a prayer and a song. You can actually see results. And it's about knowing and understanding what the levels of those nutrients are in your body.
Well, that's very important information for consumers. So it's such a multifaceted and interesting focus that you've had all these years because of the interrelationship between the good science about nutrition and the supplement industry, as well as the pharmaceutical industry, and the very complex, intricate, and ever-changing political landscape that's going on between all of those things. I recently was looking on, when we talk about Expo East and Expo West, they're so huge, but that the entire nutrient industry is one of the fastest growing, and the natural products industry. It had something like a 6.7% growth last year.
Yes, and some of those individual nutrients grow as fast in sales as 30% a year.
Well, we don't see that in too many other areas of the economy. So obviously somebody's interested.
Yeah, lots of people are interested.
Exactly.
I mean, I think we're up to something like 70+% of people are taking some form of dietary supplement, whether that's a multivitamin or collagen. But yes, the world has definitely moved here, and at Organic and Natural, we believe we have an obligation to show people the benefits of that through science and outcomes.
Right, because then the news often will pick up any kind of negative event and, sort of headline it, and yet when you actually read the story, it doesn't support the headline. And I actually think the pharmaceutical industry is in some ways financially behind that.
It doesn't take much to give a headline to a story that is too complicated for most people to understand. And the majority of these studies are derived from meta-analysis, as you know, just a compendium of research reports put together. But at its core, there's a lot to pick on with nutrients because they're talking about how much people take and what the outcome is, like you would any antibiotic or any other pharmaceutical. The dose is what's important. For us, because we already have nutrients in our body, it's more about what the nutrient level is in your body to measure it against outcome. And that's a concept that people find difficult to get their head wrapped around because it's not a standardized clinical trial.
Well, I really think that people should, or just the entire medical community, should be testing people for nutrients as a regular yearly or bi-yearly scan, because we can avoid so many illnesses just by knowing we're a little bit low before a disease process begins. But we're going to take a little break right here, Karen, and I'd like to remind you listeners that you are listening to Herbally Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. Listen live online at nccradio.org or on iHeartRadio. For more information on today's guest or topic, send us an email at whpc@ncc.edu. Stay tuned. Herbally Yours will be right back.
Okay, men, this is your time. Maybe you didn't choose this, but you're here now. You're going to go out there and be an all-star caregiver. It's up to you. So what are you going to do? You're going to go grocery shopping, cook, clean, be there emotionally and physically. You got to dig deeper. Drive them to physical therapy, doctor's appointments. Don't you forget about the pharmacy. No, you won't. Because that's what caregivers do. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. This is your time to show the world, your family, and yourself that you're tougher than tough. Now go out there and be the best caregiver this world has ever seen. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
And thank you so much for joining us right here on Herbally Yours. You can check our website at naturalnurse.com and go to calendar to find out all the places you can join right in with us. For those of you who are local listeners here on Long Island, we will be making lots of herb walks all over the area, and you can join us in Oyster Bay, at Restoration Farm in Old Bethpage, at St. Joseph's Sisters in Brentwood, and all different locations, and as well as many, many online classes that you can join in with us from anywhere in the world, believe it or not. And today we are so happy to have as our guest Karen Howard, who has been very active in the nutraceutical industry for 30 years. And you know, Karen, I know that CBD is exploding, and I personally am a premier member of the American Cannabis Nurses Association, and I will in fact be presenting at their up-and-coming conference. Now, I know a lot is going on both from a regulatory and scientific perspective with CBD oil. So do you want to fill us in on what was hot just recently about that?
So on Friday, FDA had a hearing that was from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock in the evening on the topic of CBD. Pages and pages of witnesses. I mean, when we hit 102, I thought it was probably wise of them not to mention any more numbers. I was like 30. So it was, when you go to a congressional hearing, it's well organized. There are the substance matter experts, there are those in favor, there are those opposed. Sometimes it's so well managed that it's skewed towards the desired outcome by the majority party, but it's very organized. This was really, it kind of had a very random flow about it. There would be consumer interest at one point, and then they'd come back. There were people who didn't understand the difference between marijuana and CBD, who were there advocating for, non-legalization.
Wait a minute. Why don't we tell our listeners what that difference is, since you do know what the difference is?
I do, and it's really interesting because it's a very complex issue. So marijuana is the plant that we all know. It's being legalized medically across the states. It has a hallucinogenic effect, which was utilized many times in language, but it's being treated as medicine by 22 states, I believe it is now, that have legalized it or are in the process of legalizing it. And CBD can be derived from from that. But the way that the Congress has passed a law through a bill they passed last year is to say hemp products, agriculture hemp is now declassified for all these years. Unlike Europe, hemp could only be used to make like rope. So now there are millions of acres of hemp being created, which is a plant that's in the same family as cannabis. And as a result, they've derived something called CBD, which is a way to collectively create these cannabinoids in oils and mostly in an oil, and then administer that for the relief of symptoms of pain, improvement in sleep, all different kinds of things that people are finding work with CBD. And the most popular of which is the epilepsy drug that was that became a drug by FDA out of an experience in Colorado. So that's where the rub is. What is a drug, once again, and what is a dietary supplement when it comes to something called CBD?
Yeah, and I know that they're sort of struggling over the name. Now, I'm doing a lot of regulatory consulting in the industry because there's like a million startup companies, everybody grabbing for some of this huge market. And as you said, there's everyone from complete charlatans to really excellently tested and well-done products. And there's a real confusion about labeling. Like, can you say CBD on the front, or do you have to call it hemp extract?
And the current mode of thinking is you are safer by saying full spectrum hemp than you are to say CBD. Not necessarily always the case, because in the middle of all this chaos, the states have started issuing their own regulations, and the states have taken some pretty ardent action in terms of taking product, off trucks, not letting it cross lines. Hemp seed's not allowed to come across from Canada into the U.S. So it's a very complicated situation, and yet I think it went viral, and FDA was completely caught unprepared for what was going to happen with CBD.
And like you said, there's an actual pharmaceutical drug that is CBD. So then there's all those confusing labeling issues about when something is a pharmaceutical, it cannot be marketed as a dietary supplement.
And the point that we raised at this hearing is essentially that this full spectrum hemp extract, aka CBD, is not the same article. It is not the patented and approved drug Epidiolex. Molecularly, it's different. And so since it's not the same agent, and since it's intended use, CBD's intended use is to not treat a disease, it's not precluded from becoming a dietary supplement, because half the people in that room on Friday were there to say this is a drug and should be managed as such, and they're using language that refers to CBD as medicine intentionally, when the actuality, from a legal perspective, our position is this is not precluded from being a dietary supplement. So you already have the tools to manage it, so get it together and let's go manage this process.
It's quite amazing. Just for our local listeners here on Long Island, I want to remind everyone that you are listening to Herbal Yours on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Ellen Kamhi, the natural nurse, and my guest today is Karen Howard, and you can find out more at nutrientpower.org. That's a really good place for consumers to go to, learn about nutrients and foods that contain them, and they have ways you can look up what level you might have or you should have, and then you can ask your doctor to get tested for vitamin D and omega-3s, or you can go to organicandnatural.org. Now, so Karen, I actually was driving around locally on Route 110. Our local listeners will know what I'm talking about, in the Huntington area, and there was this giant store called Botanica, I think. And I, of course, am an herbalist, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that could be. And my husband is more of a horticulturist gardener, and he said, oh, it must be a garden center. So we didn't know what it was. We decided just let's stop and see what it is. And when we went in there, it's actually a giant dispensary. Now, that's a whole other issue about the fact that simultaneously, across most of the United States, full THC-containing cannabis, which is different than CBD, is also becoming legalized in terms of medical access.
Absolutely. And that does add to the confusion. And I can give you a personal example. I have a salve that's a THC-CBD combo. It's used primarily through the dispensary by people for radiation treatment, and it's incredibly effective. So if I have a product like that I can get through the pharmacy that I use on things like a torn meniscus, what does that mean for people who are now not necessarily utilizing the medical marijuana pathway, but they're using CBD? So it just confuses the consumer one step more. And I saw that through that testimony over and over and over about the way people were using language, the way they were talking about marijuana and its potentially addictive properties versus what we're talking about, which is a hemp-derived product that is restricted by the law to not be more than 0.3 THC, which is the active ingredient in marijuana. So remember, they do come from the same plant, right? Where they are the same plant family. So that they're going to have pieces of each other. And it goes even further when you talk about the European experience. But that's essentially what we're talking about, is legalizing in the marketplace, which is already there, and how to educate consumers about what a good quality product is and what you need to look for. One person actually testified that a CBD should not contain anything more than 0.1% THC, which goes back to let's make it all a drug. All of it's a drug.
Yeah, it's just so incredibly confusing. Well, I'm following everything that you're saying. I know many of our listeners might still go, what? So just to know, the basic message is it is confusing, and that's why the American Cannabis Nurses Association was established, to be sure that we have a benchmark and a professional organization that is very clear and can help consumers decide which might be the best path for them. But definitely it's helping so many thousands of people that the FDA cannot turn off that faucet anymore.
No. It's definitely, it's still going to gush as much as there's no way to shut this down. It's impossible. So what I came away from, and I've spoken to my board about, is not only are consumers confused, but so are regulators at the state and the federal level. They need definitions. They need to know what people are talking about with full spectrum hemp. They need to know, they're very concerned about dosing strategies and the safety of this product, which is being documented all over the world through something called generally regarded as safe, which is research that's generally done behind the scenes and can support the fact that no harm is being done here. So we're trying to figure out how we can support the need to get this into the regulators' hands so that they have they have a better grasp of what the industry is actually doing, the safety level. And the other thing that's happening is states are regulating what kinds of diseases you can use CBD for. So that adds further confusion as to whether this is, something that we have to use that funny language around structure function claim with supplements, or, people are expecting to take this to have their pain reduced. That's the bottom line. So it needs a lot more clarity, and I don't see a fast solution to this, even if they decided they wanted to go for a piece of legislation, which, in my opinion, is the slowest way to get anything done.
Wow, that's so true. And then in that mix also is the fact that the FDA, the head of the FDA, is in the middle of transitioning. So, we are done. We're up to the last minute. Thank you so much for such an interesting show. Our guest, Karen Howard, I want to thank you for tuning into Herbally Yours, produced in the studios of 90.3 WHPC, Nassau Community College, Garden City, New York. For further information, you can email us at whpc@ncc.edu. This is your host, Ellen Kamhi at naturalnurse.com, inviting you to join us next week for another edition of Herbally Yours. Until then, stay healthy.